philosophy to limit the phenolic characteristics in the beers. I don't find them that complementary, and I really don't want to produce a beer with medicinal characteristics in it. Pitching rate and secondary. Brewers have their theories of why, I know brewers were like, I pitch high because it gets more character, and I know brewers say I pitch low because I stress the yeast and it gets more characters. From research that was done with the same 8 strains, showed that really it's just variable from strain to strain. It was different in each one. Sometimes higher pitch counts lowered higher alcohol, sometimes they raised them, and the same was true for esters. So I've not found much correlated effect over attenuation either. Basically what I would say is don't add too much Brett yeast slurry, otherwise you're just blending the flavor in created from propagation, and that's going to be more kind of acetic acid. In general, and a lot of this is actually taken from, I know this is what Vinny tries to do at Russian River, it's about 2 million cells per mil, and it's kind of the same thing we based ours off. Sometimes we'll go lower. I've got on here, trying anywhere from like 500,000 cells up to 2 million, but it seems to be in the 1 million to about 2 million range is kind of enough. One way you can look at it too is just seeing what your residual extract is and pitching enough that it would ferment that out as though it was a primary. Bottle conditioning. Again, you see a lot of beers that are bottle conditioned with Brett. It's a popular technique to get the Brett character. It's an easy way to do it without maybe contaminating your equipment, or you just want to play around with the Brett a little bit, kind of see what it might do in a beer. It's a good way. If you're doing it from your bottling bucket, adding it in first, again, you might need an extra set of gaskets, porous material on the bottle filler, and things to think about. So best practice is dousing in one. Puts a nice finishing touch on the beer. Allows a light integration of Brettanomyces character, sometimes instead of a Brett bomb. A Brett bomb in a beer is not always very complementary. You just want to build complexity in a beer, sometimes when you're using Brett. So here you're looking at smaller cell counts. The time to reach it can also be strain dependent. I know New Belgium's aging their beers for 2 weeks before they're then doing it out. They have a great strain that's really fast in producing the secondary character. Other people age theirs for 3 months then before they put them out. So just kind of really is going to depend on the yeast and what one you try to use and how you like its character development. That's the great thing about being homebrewers is, it's sitting in your closet or in your area and you're just kind of waiting for it. You're just tasting it here and there. So, raw materials. So here's what you're looking at. Here's where you're actually looking at how you're going to build the beer and what you're going to put into the beer and how the Brettanomyces is going to affect that. So we're looking at developing a beer that's going to be fermented with Brett. You need to develop the recipe kind of the same way. And this takes a little bit different thinking than you would for, your red or your stout or anything that you've got a go-to recipe that you know about. So no one sets out to make a flabby beer or one lacking aroma or flavor. This can be the case with Brettanomyces. And it's usually associated with dryness due to over-attenuation. I think it's more to do with, the factors that we talked about earlier with Brett not producing as much glycerol, not having as much mouthfeel. So the way I go about it is I build a body into the beer, basically. So I'm looking at the Brettanomyces yeast, their ability to over-attenuate, as well as the lack of glycerol production. So some things that I know I can do in the brew house before I even build the recipe, I can maybe mash at a higher temperature to keep some residuals. I can lower my mash rest time so I don't get full conversion from my enzymes. But both of these could favor a longer end fermentation. So where I might get a good fermentation in the beginning, and then those last points kind of pewter out and harder. And that's a slower beer to produce. So if I'm looking to make a beer that's ready to bottle, in the same amount of time that I might do an IPA or a stout, these techniques might not exactly be the best. And that's where I like to use ingredients more to build it in. Adjuncts. I think adjuncts are one of the best ways. I've got 5% oats in every single one of my Brett beers. And I prefer steel cut oats. I think this gives a silky, creamy mouthfeel with a really light flavor contribution. Flaked wheat. Flaked wheat's more good for in an aged beer. You're going to have that protein content that adds to a little bit of head retention, and just from the high protein levels. There's always Cara Pills, Cara Health, Cara Foam. I don't use those as much, but some people really like them to build the body and head retention. And the other is rye and spelt. So rye adds kind of a light characteristic at about 5% as well. And the spelt, I've heard of spelt, just pure mouthfeel, but also I know it gives a little bit of graininess. And then the other is acidulated malt. So we talked about this in building, a beer. It's a sour beer. The acidulated malt acids, the lactic acids, they build mouthfeel, they build a sensation on your tongue, and those can be really complementary. So it kind of depends on how much you want to use. You're looking at anywhere from 10%, maybe lower 5%. And then there's our sour mash or sour wort. So flavor contribution from the malts. Primary fermentation with Brettanomyces, you're looking at a relatively clean beer. Each strain is going to have its own characteristics and aromas, and these are kind of going to be able to play off what you think you can build into the recipe. I look at Vienna and Munich. I really like both these malts a lot. I think they've got a nice contribution that can be on top of the base malts. You've got your Cara Vienna, Cara Roma, Caramel, Honey, Special B. All these malts, in different proportions, Special B much smaller proportions. They add a nice character in the Brett beer. I personally stay away from the caramel or the crystal malts. I just think their residual sweetness, I don't find goes as well with the Brett beers, but drinking beer, brewing beer, it's all dogma, it's all personal opinion, so it's something to look at and kind of develop what you think you like. I would say careful about adding malts which increase the bready flavor, so maybe like biscuit malts like this. That aroma is kind of already created by the Brettanomyces, and in my opinion, you don't want to kind of up that characteristic too much. Roasted malts, dark Brett beers, like a Baltic Porter, I think they just taste awesome. They have such a great characteristic flavor and development. I stay away from the more roast, like say a roast malt or black malt, because of the astringency that it leads. The Brettanomyces also already creates sort of a metallic kind of astringent flavor sometimes. So I use more like the dehusked malts. I think those are really nice. They give more of that rounder kind of flavor and characteristic. And then hops. Brettanomyces can do some really interesting things with aromatic hops and create some really nice flavors. When you're using it in primary and you've got a little bit more estery, kind of fruity characteristic, and you show that off with the hops, with fruity or piney or citrus type aroma hops, especially your C hops and stuff, it can be really nice. It can even kind of overpower some of the Brett characteristics where it's hard to tell that it's a Brett beer. You think you're drinking an IPA or a pale ale. So brewing techniques. This is what we were talking about then. Once you've built your recipe, you've kind of decided how you're going to build body into the beer, how you're going to build that character into the beer. You're then looking at how you're going to carry that through the brew house and through fermentation. So single infusion mash, I'm really not sure there's anything to be gained by a step mash. I think there's some character you can get, and there's some different things you can pull out, but in general, especially with doing a Brettanomyces beer, you're going to get out of a single infusion mash what you're going to get out of a complicated step mash, if not just saving time. So, as we talked about, I like to limit the amount of phenolics in the beer. I don't find them very complementary in a Brett beer, but I know other brewers who are specifically doing step mashes in their beers. That way they can get the ferulic acid rest. So it's the precursor for the 4-vinyl glycol and the 4-ethyl glycols we talked about. If you want the spicy, smoky phenolic characteristics, ferulic acid rest. 109 to about 111 degrees Fahrenheit. Enzymes release ferulic acid and the hydroxycinnamic acids. And the bread or your other yeasts will then convert those into the compounds, into the flavor active compounds. Pretty standard mash temp, 65, 67, or 150 to 153 degrees. Adequate conversion with highly modified malts, large starch granule gelatinization. Mash rest, tend to do a mash rest for 30 minutes, enough time for conversions. I know in homebrewing we generally rest for about an hour, so that's, again, that's dogma kind of. Recirc or boil off until solids are cleared. In the brew house, we usually do this for about 10 minutes. That's on a 15-barrel batch. Mash thickness, I use a liquor to grist ratio about 2.5 to 1. The reason why I'm looking at this is, how much am I going to promote dryness? At a 3 to 1 ratio, I have a much wetter mash, so my enzymes are going to be more active. I'm going to get a lot of conversion, and I'm going to be able to bring my fermentation down. With a little bit drier mash, and 2.5 to 1 is not even that dry, but I'm going to be able to just keep a little bit more of those dextrins. I like the way the mash works, and I like the conversion I get. Sparging. I think this is a big one. I find this in a lot of beers. If you're sparging too hot, you're going to extract husk material, tannin flavors. It's going to get you the anthocyanins, the hydroxycinnamic acids, and you're just going to get kind of a husky, astringent beer. So it creates astringency, possible phenolic precursors. 168 degrees Fahrenheit will certainly do the job. It's enough. I know some people sparge warmer because they're looking at raising the grain bed temperature, but the other is your final runnings. And your final runnings, it's going to depend on the beer. If you're producing a high gravity beer, you're not going to get down that low. But if you're not, going below 2-3 degrees Plato, you even find that a little bit low sometimes. You're just collecting, basically material from your malt, and you're not getting your sugars anymore. So yeah, I'd love to field any questions that people have about any Britannomyces brews they've done or anything. I think that's really the best way to answer questions because right now it's it's not totally specific. Everyone's doing different things. So if anyone's got any questions, I'd love to take them.